Thanks for joining me. National Cabinet met in Sydney this afternoon to discuss COVID-19 settings, but also key joint actions for the upcoming Jobs and Skills Summit that will be held in Canberra over the next 2 days. We heard a report from the Acting Chief Medical Officer, Professor Michael Kidd, who provided an update on the pandemic and outlined strategies for combating potential COVID-19 waves into the future. First Ministers reinforced their commitment to continued collaboration between Commonwealth, state and territory governments in managing the pandemic. The National Cabinet agreed that the isolation periods for COVID-19 positive cases would be reduced from 7 to 5 following a positive test, with the following caveats. This would apply to people with no symptoms. Clearly, if you have symptoms, we want people to stay home. We want people to act responsibly. 7 days isolation will also remain for workers in high-risk setting, including aged care, disability care, home care is important as well. I believe, and First Ministers agreed, that on the weight of evidence, this was a proportionate response at this point in the pandemic. These changes will come into effect from next Friday, the 9th of September, with the paid pandemic leave disaster payment eligibility to reflect the changed isolation periods effective from the same date. Services Australia will provide advice in 48 hours. They'll work through by the end of Friday to be able to update the advice on their website. National Cabinet also agreed to remove the mandatory wearing of masks on domestic flights. This change will also come into effect from Friday the 9th of September. Ahead of the Jobs and Skills Summit, First Ministers discussed the ongoing workforce shortages and skills shortages that are impacting our economy and impacting businesses' ability to operate. And we had a constructive discussion and agreed on a vision statement and guiding principles for a new national skills agreement that will come into effect in 2024. First Ministers discussed the essential role of early childhood education and care as part of the education system and as a powerful lever for increasing participation of women in the workforce. We also agreed on the importance of delivering nationally significant energy transmission projects and supporting regional communities and workforces to capture the opportunities emerging from Australia's transition to a net zero emissions economy. We agreed to commence work on the new National Skills Agreement in place from 1 January 2024 for state and territory energy ministers to work towards implementing the reforms to accelerate the delivery of transmission projects. People would be aware that was identified in our Rewiring the Nation plan and through the IEMO work on their integrated systems plan going forward. We will work together on the long-term vision for early childhood education and care to better support parents' workforce participation. We see this as a major productivity initiative. Childcare isn't about baby-minding, it's about growing our economy and about women's workforce participation, and will be a very positive issue going forward. We'll discuss housing affordability issues in person at the next meeting of the National Cabinet, and we also agreed to task the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency to accelerate skills and qualification recognition in key health sectors. The Health Ministers are having a meeting this Friday. It was a very collegiate meeting. There were very positive discussions in the lead up to today's meeting. Agreement was reached. And again, we are reaffirming the way that the National Cabinet and processes are operating. That is, trying to come to common agreement going forward so that it's clearer rather than different jurisdictions going different ways. And that was something that I think was extremely positive. We'll have a face-to-face meeting on the 30th of September, but we'll have a virtual meeting in a fortnight's time to discuss other issues after the change comes in on the 9th of September as well, including support for workforce issues that need to be determined going forward. Happy to take some questions.
Will the pandemic payment be extended beyond September?
That's what we'll meet in a couple of weeks' time to determine that. People had some timing issues today just in terms of the scheduling.
So some premiers had an issue with it?
No, it's not a disagreement. It's a matter of the time, the clock. People have meetings. There's a VCA dinner tonight. We've got the Jobs and Skills Summit over the next couple of days, and we'll work those issues through. There's a general view that we need to ensure that people are looked after who need being looked after. It's a matter of working those issues through, and that's why we're meeting in a fortnight's time, because the agreement of the extension of paid pandemic leave is due to conclude at the end of September, so that provides plenty of time to have a collegiate discussion, particularly because it's both Commonwealth and state now. We share the funding responsibility for it.
But hang on, you're saying you're definitely going to make people stay at home for at least 5 days if they have COVID, but you're not definitely going to extend the pandemic leave payments?
No. I'm saying that we made a decision today about reducing the leave from 7 to 5. So that's a change. We haven't changed the arrangements with regard to payments. We'll have a meeting about that in a couple of weeks' time.
Do you expect that 5 days will still be in existence at the end of September? And just on another note, there's no other disease in Australia, but the government has mandated isolation periods for. At what stage of a pandemic do you think it will become a personal choice?
Well, that's part of the discussion that we're having, and that's the context of the reduction from 7 days down to 5 days. We had a discussion about people looking after each other, people looking after their own health, people being responsible for that, and making sure that they look after each other. That is what has been happening. There aren't mandated requirements for the flu or for a range of other illnesses that people can suffer from. And what we want to do is to make sure that government responds to the changed circumstance. The COVID is likely to be around for a considerable period of time, and we need to respond appropriately to it based upon the weight of evidence.
So just to be very clear on that point, you're saying that the 5 days could be reduced to 0 by the end of September?
No, I'm not saying that. I can't be clearer than what I've said. So 7 days down to 5 days, that is what we have decided.
Sure, but people could wake up on October 1 and still be required to take 5 days off work but not have the payment.
I've gone through, I've gone through very clearly. Okay, let's be clear. 7 days down to 5 days is what is occurring from the 9th of September. With regard to paid pandemic leave, we wanted time as well, as is appropriate, to consult about what we do with paid pandemic leave. We'll have a meeting about that in a couple of weeks, about where that goes.
Cool.
But the 5 days leave at some time in the future, that will be reassessed, but there's no timing for that. But gradually, as we come to deal with COVID over a long period of time, we need to ensure that the mechanisms that have been put in place by government that impose restrictions on people, that we reassess them at an appropriate time.
What would the pandemic environment look like to you where you would be comfortable removing that mandatory isolation requirement at all?
Well, we'll continue to take advice on that. We quite clearly are not in a position to do that at this point in time.
What?
And no one was arguing for that to happen at this point in time.
It's now almost 7 months since the UK scrapped all COVID isolation requirements, and I've just been to London, they're doing fine. Why isn't Australia able to trust its citizens to just look after their own health and stay home if they're sick and if they feel like they need to?
Well, I'm telling you what the decision was of the National Cabinet today, based upon the weight of evidence and the advice that we received. We'll continue to assess these issues and what restrictions are appropriate at any point in time.
With the job summit, were there any robust discussions about the untapped labour market of refugees on bridging visas and attracting more migrants to come as soon as possible, and cutting the red tape so more migrants could come in, but also thousands of refugees on bridging visas who could be in the labour force tomorrow?
There was discussion about visas and the visa backlog which is there. There was discussion about migration numbers and about skill shortages, but also about training Australians. So about those two things, clearly there's a need to look at migration issues, and they'll be looked at over the next couple of days. That's a task, if you like, for the Jobs and Skills Summit. Today, with the state premiers and chief ministers, the focus was on skills and particular training, because that's the area where the Commonwealth shares responsibility with states and territories. The states and territories run TAFE, and that's why we were particularly focused on that today.
And just on foreign affairs, were you briefed about Sogovare's move about banning foreign ships? Were you briefed on that, and does that show that your efforts in Pacific diplomacy aren't garnering the fruits as quick as you wanted?
Well, I don't discuss the briefings that I receive on national security. What I can say clearly is that Australia is re-engaged with the Pacific. Penny Wong has been in Papua New Guinea and then Timor-Leste this week. Australia is very engaged with our Pacific neighbours, and indeed Prime Minister Sogavare is going to visit Australia, and I will welcome his visit.
Can you shed some light as to why the 7-day isolation remains for workers in high-risk settings?
Because that was the advice that we received, is that from the Chief Health Officer gave the presentation, and in terms of people there are different requirements now, as you'd be aware, in areas like aged care and disability care. They are areas where you have people who are particularly vulnerable. So we want to make sure that those sections which are vulnerable are particularly looked after. Last one.
Did any Premier make a case for reducing the isolation period to 0 days today? And is there any modelling that was presented or has been presented about when that point might be reached?
No and no. Thank
Can
you.
I fit one more on migration? Has unions and business come to an agreement on what the annual migration intake figure should be, and if so, what's that figure?
The federal government sets the migration numbers, and the federal government will continue to set our migration numbers, but I'm very pleased at the level of cooperation which we're seeing in the lead up to the Jobs and Skills Summit. We're seeing genuine dialogue between business and between unions and civil society. It's a positive thing. I believe that we get a lot when we collaborate, when we maximise input, when we're inclusive. It's the sort of government that I want to lead. I said that people had conflict fatigue. People are looking for solutions, not arguments. And I thank all those who in good faith have participated in trying to search for common solutions in the national interest. And I feel very positive about not just the next 2 days, but for what it symbolises. This isn't the end of the discussion at the Jobs and Skills Summit. This in many ways is the start of it, the start of what I hope is a new era of collaboration, a new era of inclusiveness, one where we look for ideas, where we look for input, where we look for genuine engagement and respect, where we listen to each other, even where people disagree. And I think an example of that is Jennifer Westacott and Sally McManus and the debate that they had on Insiders on Sunday. That was respectful. They came at it from different perspectives, but that's how you get understanding, by actually listening to each other. And I look forward to that collaboration taking place in Canberra, and I look forward to my discussion at the Business Council of Australia tonight. Thanks very much.